Close your eyes. Try to remember a memory from your childhood. Perhaps a meal at the dinner table. Learning how to ride a bike. Really try to envision it. The colors, the sounds. Now open your eyes. Everything that you envisioned most likely never happened. Memory isn't infallible. In fact, it's quite inaccurate. Every time we remember something, we don't recall it like looking up a photo on our phone. Rather, we reconstruct it with what information we think we have. This concept is an integral part of the film Memento, which follows the story of a man named Leonard who is tracking down the man who killed his wife and gave him brain damage/amnesia.
I'm not sure. I think I may have asked you to hold my calls.
You don't know?
Well, I think I may have. I'm not too good on the phone.
Right, you said you like to look people in the eye when you talk to them.
Yeah.
You don't remember saying that.
Well, that's the thing. I have this condition.
Condition?
It's my memory.
Amnesia.
No. It's different from that. I have no short-term memory. I know who I am. I know all about myself. Since my injury, I can't make new memories. Everything fades. If we talk for too long, I'll forget how we started. And next time I see you, I'm not going to remember this conversation. I don't even know if I've met you before. So if I seem a little strange or rude or something,
In Memento, since the perspective of the movie is Leonard's, a lot of the narrative is dependent on what he does and doesn't remember. But all of this, tied with Leonard's brain damage, creates a lot of unreliability in the field of the narrator. In fact, Leonard says it best himself.
his testimony is unreliable. Cops don't catch a killer by sitting around remembering stuff.
Right.
They collect facts.
That's not what I'm
They
saying.
make notes and they draw conclusions. Facts, not memories. That's how you investigate. I know. It's what I used to do. Look, memory can change the shape of a room. It can change the color of a car. And memories can be distorted. They're just an interpretation. They're not a record. And they're irrelevant if you have the facts.
So let's find the facts. In this analysis, we will evaluate Leonard's psychology by applying real-world cases to what is shown in the film. The answer will conclude that based off of his inconsistent showings of symptoms compared to real-world amnesiacs, as well as the displays of psychopathic personality, Leonard in fact does not suffer from anterograde amnesia, and may in fact be a psychopath. The primary facts we will focus on relate to psychology as we analyze Leonard's general behavior. Since the film has two main components, one being color scenes which operates backwards, and then the other being the black and white scenes that operate forwards, we can interpret the color scenes as objective truths, since the scenes are actually occurring from a third-person narrator that is only framed in a way to show Leonard's point of view with amnesia. However, the black and white scenes will be interpreted with heavy skepticism and interpretation given that they are entirely in the point of view of Leonard's memory. The actual film Memento has been lauded by the general media for its accurate depiction of anterograde amnesia. However, many of our secondary sources conflict with this idea. These sources are either direct psychological analysis of the film or simply scientific papers accounting towards cases of amnesiacs, traumatic brain injuries, psychosis, and personality/psychopathy. Since the papers are primarily scientific, we will be using these sources as sort of stepping stones by agreeing with them and using them to form a conclusion that can be used to move on to the next one regarding Leonard's psychology. The first issue that must be addressed is a general idea pushed by Leonard himself onto the audience. I mean, look at the clip. Now, on first viewership, this may seem true. After all, Leonard seems to, in fact, suffer from short-term memory loss in the way the color scenes are framed. However, we can't simply take this for granted since the framing of the movie may be biased from Leonard's point of view. Instead of paying attention to this, let's look for smaller facts instead to see if Leonard is telling the truth. What are some of these facts, you might ask? 1. One of the most critical being Leonard continually bringing up his last true memory, his wife being killed. 2. Leonard also claims he can learn through perception. 3. Another point he likes to make is the story of Sammy Jenkins, who is another supposed amnesiac he dealt with prior to his brain injury. Now, how do these really hold up? first case that foils Leonard's claim of actually suffering from amnesia is his story of remembering the event that caused his amnesia, which in fact, when compared to actual neuroclinical cases, is inconsistent with their inability to remember the event that caused their mental disorder.
Now, secondly, Leonard makes a point that he can function properly despite his supposed amnesia because he has created a routine through the messages and photos he leaves behind for himself. He knows which pockets to check and where to look for these mementos that he leaves behind. This is actually true and is reflective of real-life anterograde amnesiacs. As seen in one real-world case, a woman, given the alias Angie for privacy, was described in a case report to have had the contents of all the kitchen cabinets and drawers labeled on the outside with sticky notes so that she could quickly put away new items from the grocery store or put the clean dishes back in their assigned spot so that she could find them again. When Angie and her new husband moved into a new house, the kitchen was organized so that all of the cabinets and drawers were in the same exact location as they were organized at the old house. Using these particular organizational systems, she no longer required the sticky notes in the kitchen. Now, Leonard's behavior seems to line up. However, there's one scene where he tries to push/run into the door of the discount inn before realizing that he has to pull it open. This may seem trivial. After all, he has amnesia. He shouldn't know the door should be pulled. But the thing is, he should. At this moment, Leonard had been sitting at the inn for weeks. Through trial and error and repetition, such as Angie, he should have subconsciously known to pull the door. Leonard himself would agree with this. After all, the third point we are looking at in the movie is the story of Sammy Jenkins, someone Leonard accused of faking his amnesia, or at least not actually having it, because he failed to subconsciously avoid touching a shock block when told to grab a random block in front of him. Now, this case is also interesting, not just because of its similarities to Leonard and the door, but because the idea that Sammy Jenkins might actually be Leonard himself. Since the story of Jenkins is told through Leonard's memory, it cannot be fully trusted. After all, memory is faulty, and the story is biased by Leonard's recalling of the supposed event. This is especially clear in a quick but key moment. When telling the end of Jenkins' stories, Leonard narrates that he was admitted into a mental hospital. Before few key frames of the scene showing Jenkins, we see that Jenkins actually turns into Leonard. Since this whole memory is Leonard's, it could perhaps be Leonard's subconscious telling him and the audience that he is Jenkins, which would also mean that Jenkins' diagnosis of not actually having amnesia would also apply to Leonard. If this weren't enough evidence to show that Leonard didn't actually have amnesia, there's one more moment that crucifies Leonard, where he slips up and recalls something that he should not know.
Checked into in this shithole.
Just two. So far.
Well, at least you're being honest about ripping me off.
Well, you're not going to remember anyway.
You don't have to be that honest, Bert.
Leonard, always get a receipt.
Oh, yeah. I'll write that down.
He remembers Bert's name. This leads into our second step in analyzing Leonard, because if he doesn't have amnesia, what does he have that could possibly explain his behavior and struggle with memory? The best answer for this would be psychosis, which would explain the appearance or delusion of amnesia. First, let's look at what Leonard claims started his amnesia, that being John G. hitting him in the back of the head during the break-in where his wife was killed. If this scene were to be true, it could possibly explain how he got psychosis, as the brain damage gave him psychosis rather than amnesia. Studies corroborate this idea, as a 2002 study found that, though rare, everyone is vulnerable to a psychotic disorder, and psychosis will result when a threshold of damage to certain areas of the brain are attained. Traumatic brain injury can be the primary cause of psychosis, or at least contribute to the development of a psychosis through secondary seizure disorder, increasing biological and psychological risk and triggering psychosis in vulnerable patients. But what if John G. didn't kill Leonard's wife, if he did exist at all? Perhaps he didn't even give Leonard psychosis directly. Ronald Booth sides with this idea, as he claims that though Leonard's wife might have been raped by someone named John G., observations show that she was not killed then. There are several scenes where she opens her eyes on the bathroom floor, indicating that she was not killed then. Additionally, we see clips of Leonard with his wife, with his tattoo saying, "John G. raped and killed my wife," purposefully angled to cut it off only saying John G. raped, omitting his role in murdering Leonard's wife. Another noteworthy tattoo in the scene is one proclaiming, "I did it." The "I did it" tattoo answers our next question. If John G. didn't kill him, then who did? In this case, it would be Leonard, who can be tied back to the story of Sammy Jenkins. We've already established a possibility of Leonard being Sammy, but this is further corroborated by Teddy, who also tells Leonard the same thing.
See, Sammy's wife came to me.
Sammy didn't have a wife. It was your wife who had diabetes.
Ouch.
My wife wasn't diabetic.
You sure?
Ouch. Cut it out.
She wasn't diabetic. You think I don't know my own wife?
In this case, Leonard would have suffered psychosis prior, possibly from John G., who would have raped but not killed his wife, and then killed his wife after her testing his psychosis, like Sammy Jenkins' wife did. This scenario is best explained by Jonathan Redmond from the University of Minnesota, where he quotes Freud's thesis of paranoia, where intolerable aspects of the self are projected onto the other. Redmond makes a claim that Leonard killed his wife, and in grief, subconsciously through a psychosis, made the delusion to himself that John G. raped and murdered his wife, and that he had a neurological condition where he could not make new memories. In this scenario, John G. would have assaulted Leonard's wife and gave him psychosis. And through her testing of his psychosis, Leonard would have killed his wife through an insulin overdose, which, out of guilt, drove him to the delusion of projecting his actions onto the false ego that is Sammy Jenkins, if he did exist at all, and blaming his wife's death on to John G., all as a means of defense against recognizing his own involvement in her death. So let's review. What do we know? Traumatic brain injuries like the one Leonard claims to have suffered can in fact induce psychosis, or increase the likelihood of psychosis. And psychosis can be triggered as a defense mechanism, and in Leonard's case can be a form of him coping with the fact that he killed his wife. So, what does this mean? John G. could have broken into Leonard's home and killed his wife, giving him psychosis, or he didn't kill her, and Leonard did later on. Though there are some gray areas, we still seem to have a general idea of what's going on, right? However, there's one more inconsistency in the movie that muddles any chance of understanding what actually happens, and that being Leonard's psychopathy.
In the movie's conclusion, Leonard sets clues for himself in order to gain satisfaction for murdering Teddy, who he knows is innocent. The movie starts and ends with him knowingly subjecting Teddy to death, even though he is not John G., admitting that he is lying to make himself feel better. Additionally, Leonard's and Sammy's struggles with the blocks and doors indicate not just their failure to learn through repetition, but through pain. Initially, we used the TBI from John G. as a reason to explain Leonard's psychosis, which is a mental health disorder. However, this cannot explain psychopathy, which is a personality disorder. Leonard's struggle with memory should not affect his underlying decision-making, which is driven by his personality. While our memory is critically important to us, individual memories do not drive our personality. In fact, psychopathy itself is generally determined from birth, though the general pathophysiology is not fully known. Since we know there is not another possible explanation for Leonard's psychopathy, what evidence is there to show that he does have it? The case of Leonard and Sammy touching the blocks and doors shows an inability to learn through pain, a telltale trait of psychopaths. Now we have a plethora of possibilities. Does Sammy have psychopathy? If he doesn't, then he most likely has psychosis. But if he does have psychosis, did he actually kill his wife? Which is a fact later projected onto Sammy Jenkins. Or did John G. kill her and everything in this movie is true? Everything stems from what the viewers believe. One source analyzing the movie even makes a bold claim that Leonard was a psychopath, aware of what he was doing the entire time, and just acted like he had amnesia as some sort of game. Though it's unsure how deep Nolan intended to go regarding Leonard's psychology, it's clear that he intended for the film to lean into this field of uncertainty through the unreliability of the narrator. He does this with the many small inconsistencies placed in the movie that call into question what is true and what's a lie. It even goes as far as having bonus material in the Memento DVD set, which has a psychiatric analysis sheet showing Leonard's undergoing numerous examinations. But leaving the final portion, the analysis, blank, quite literally calling us, the audience, into action to diagnose Leonard's ourselves. So the real question remains, what is your diagnosis?